So welcome to our presentation, Mothers Can Travel Too, with Bri Melitta Nuccio of the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple. She is also the founder at the Mount Nysa Mystery School, which is dedicated to the study of ancient Mediterranean religion and the mysteries of classical antiquity. She's in the priestess training program here in the temple. She's also studied with Dr. Carla Ionescu of the Artemis Research Center, and they lead some trips and tours together. She has served people around the world through retreats, pilgrimages, holistic birth work, postpartum care, Hellenic religious education, and methods of divination. Today, she is going to share with us what it has been like to travel to destinations in the spiritual world with her baby at her breast. Welcome, Bri. It's nice to have you here and to get to enjoy your wisdom today.
Thank you, Priestess Yesha. And first, before I get into this, is there any way for me to share my screen?
Sure.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm so excited to be here. And I confess that when Priestess Yesha approached me about this topic, I hadn't ever thought about sharing it. And I think now, what a beautiful thing to share, and probably really relevant for mothers who feel this calling to sacred travel. So thank you for providing this space. And let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. I've got some fun pictures here. All right, so Mothers Can Travel Too. I wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about my own travel journey, because it started long before I became a mother. And I really do believe that my own travels as a child are part of my inspiration in wanting to provide the same experiences for my own child. And that really started when I was quite young. I think I was 4 or 5 when I first traveled outside the country. I was really lucky that my father was a world traveler. He was an auditor for many years, and so he traveled to dozens and dozens of different countries, many of which most people have never even thought of traveling to. And while he was an auditor, it's not quite sacred travel. I really do believe that he had some deeply sacred experiences, and he would always bring me back these little mementos from places that he went that sounded so exotic, and it really put the travel bug in me. And when we started traveling as a family, that was just the most incredible experience that instilled a lifelong love of travel for me. Of course, at the time, we would go to Mexico, we'd hop over the border, basically. I didn't even need a passport at the time. This was pre 9/11 in the United States. But I truly feel like that excitement just bubbling up within me to remember that feeling of traveling for the first time, or the first few times. And I remember telling my parents that I actually liked going to the airport and getting on the plane more than getting to our destination, because that feeling of going somewhere new was just so exciting as a child. So that feeling of wonderment never really left me. I had the travel bug, and I was privileged. I was lucky when I was a teenager that my stepfamily lived in France. My stepfamily is French. And so I spent many summer and winter break, as a 16-year-old, just hopping around Europe and staying with relatives and getting on the train and finding a 60-euro flight to Rome and going and backpacking in Rome for a couple days. And I really became my own tour guide. And I do believe that growing up with a travel-minded family that didn't necessarily have a ton of money or resources, but just went with a curious mind and an adventurous spirit, it really did open me up to feeling confident to travel on my own, especially as a young single woman. So that continued. The travel bug just sort of intensifies. If you have it, you know what I mean. It's like a restlessness, you can't shake it. Maybe some of you have felt that, or you've gone on a couple trips and now you just can't get enough. And sure enough, when I was 20, I packed a duffel bag and I got on a plane and I moved to Singapore. And that was its own journey. So the journey just continued. And now, you know, I'm a wife, a mother, and things are a little different in my life. So I'm going to talk about that shift into motherhood and how I decided that I could still travel and what that journey has been like for me. But before I get there, I would love to hear from those of you that we have here. Feel free to just drop in the chat where you're at in your journey. I'd love to hear what season you're in. Do you have children? How many do you have? How old are they? Where are you at in your travel journey? Where are you at in your parenthood journey? If you don't have kids, maybe are you thinking of having kids someday? And if you do have kids, have you traveled with them? And have you traveled without them as a mother? Why or why not? What are some of your hesitations or concerns that you've had traveling? So drop that in the chat and I'll just read them as I go. But a little bit more about my journey. So I became pregnant with my son in January of 2022, which was a big surprise for me. I was not planning on getting pregnant, and I was very, very excited. I had experienced 2 previous miscarriages, so this was really like I was over the moon that I had a healthy pregnancy. And at the same time, at this point in my priestess path and my spiritual journey, I had been traveling, guest teaching at workshops, facilitating retreats, co-facilitating at retreats, running women's circles, all of these adventurous things. And I sort of just thought, I guess, I thought that part of my life was over, you know, that, okay, well, this is it. I've had my fun and I'm grateful that I had my adventurous life, and now I'm going to settle down. I'm going to have a baby and it's going to be great. Well, about 6 months into my pregnancy, it was June, I was sitting in my house because I work from home, and I was looking around and I looked in the mirror and I realized I was about to go into my 3rd trimester, and I thought, holy shit, my life is about to end. And I had a little bit of a crisis, and maybe some of you with children can relate, feeling like your life is ending, feeling like whatever it is, societal expectation, or, you know, being a stay-home mom, or whatever it is, you're entering into a completely different stage of life, especially with that first child. And I was devastated. As much as I wanted my son, as much as I was excited, I just was grieving this transition and moving from maiden to mother. And really specifically, the freedom and the adventure that I had led up until that point. And so I just put it out there into my community, into my spiritual sphere. I started asking if anyone was facilitating a retreat within like the next month, because my time was running out. You know, you can't travel at a certain point in the 3rd trimester. So I knew I needed to get out and just be with myself. And a lot of people will do baby moons with their partner, which is sort of like a last hurrah as a couple to go on a trip. And that's really beautiful. But I was very specific. I told my husband, I love you, but I need to go be with me, myself, and Goddess, and maybe some other women. I really need to just be myself one last time by myself and feel all the feelings that I'm feeling. And so the response that I got back from those in my community was, no, I don't know of any retreats, but I would love to go on one as well. And so I got the hint that, hey, why don't you put together a retreat? And so sure enough, I was like, okay, I booked an Airbnb. I found 2 women to join me, and I created and sold a retreat within 24 hours. And the next month, at 7 months pregnant, I hopped on a plane and I went to Joshua Tree, California in late July. If you're not familiar with Joshua Tree, it is like a vast, super like intense desert. And I went 7 months pregnant in late July. Now, I've always been a little crazy. My friends, they say I'm chaotic neutral, and that's a perfect way to describe me. I'm very just spontaneous. And I guess that part of me could not be quelled when I was pregnant or as a mother. So I sort of just decided to lean into it and said, you know what? Screw the rules. This is what we're going to do. Before I continue with that, I'm looking at some of the experiences. My son is 32. I've traveled many times with my daughter, Grace, as a young girl to Mexico and Hawaii. She was always a good traveler when she was under 10, easy and smooth for the most part. Beautiful. I think society leads you to believe you can't do anything after you have a child. Yeah. Yeah, I really don't think that that attitude has changed that much, even in 2023. Like, there is still so much pressure on what it means to be a good mother or responsible mother, or, just focus on your kids and whatever it is. So traveling with kids, traveling without kids by yourself, I mean, it's almost unheard of for moms to focus on themselves and go travel for themselves. So it's really cool to read your experiences here. Thank you. So this was me right here, Joshua Tree, 7 months pregnant, to get back to my pregnancy journey and talk about an initiation, right? I went there and it was exactly what I needed. It was intense. It was all the feelings came out that I had maybe been repressing. It was me, myself, and Goddess, and these 2 beautiful women. And I really do believe that, in a way, like, I began that rite of passage right there in the desert. And the first step of a rite of passage is separation. So I feel like I began to shed that maiden identity, as painful as it was, with all the feelings that came with that. But it had to happen. And I'm so, so grateful that I had this experience, because when I got back, then I could go to the baby shower and be happy, genuinely, like, okay, I feel like now I can step more into the joy. Now I can step deeper and deeper into the liminal space approaching my birth. And that's exactly what happened. I just started going more and more inward when I came home, all the way up until October when I gave birth. I do want to just mention that there are some considerations if you do travel while you're pregnant. I highly recommend it if you can, because it is such a powerful spiritual experience. Do be cautious, right? If you have a higher risk pregnancy, you might not be able to get on an airplane, right? There might be different situations. You might have to get creative with doing something more local, right? For me, I had a fairly low risk pregnancy, but I do have a health condition called reactive hypoglycemia. And along with that, it's also low blood sugar and low blood pressure. And I'm not diabetic, but basically my body reacts the same way to sugar, or it's the opposite reaction. I create too much insulin, but the issue is the same. I have to lead a more or less diabetic lifestyle. If you've been pregnant, you know health issues tend to get exacerbated when you're pregnant. And that was the case for me, though I sort of ignored it. Well, I got on that plane 7 months pregnant, smushed between 2 people. And with that cabin air, the low pressure and everything, I passed out. I lost consciousness. And that was a wake-up call for me that I couldn't just go on living my life exactly the same way I had before. If I was going to do this, if I was going to be, you know, traveling pregnant and maybe with children, I had to take a little more care. And so that was a lesson for me to really listen to my body a little more closely. And the first thing I did when I got off that flight, thankfully I was okay. It was, you know, it was very brief. Baby was okay. But the first thing I did was call the airline for my flights home. And I said, this is my medical conditions. I need accommodations. I'm pregnant. I need X, Y, and Z. I need an aisle seat. I need to get on that plane sooner. I need like someone to monitor me. And they were more than willing to accommodate me. So that's something I highly recommend, is to just take advantage of the support that you have there. Now, I had a baby. Now what? I had my son in early October, right here in my living room. And, you know, for quite a few months, I was in the thick of postpartum. And in my doula training, you know, it's a pretty traditional belief that I was raised in, a traditional philosophy, which is rest, 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 and keep the mom in the house, keep the baby by the mom. We don't always live in a culture that honors that, or that's easy to do, but I tried my best to follow that. Still, I was going to facilitate a retreat in Mexico in March. So that date started creeping up. And thankfully, at that point, my son was 5 months old. I felt good enough that, okay, we're ready to travel. But I'll be honest, I don't know if I would have done it any earlier. So that's my caution to people is, you can travel. You should absolutely pursue travel as a mother. But if you are in the thick of this really early season of motherhood, then just be cautious. Make sure you're giving yourself enough rest. Postpartum is super intense, and your baby might also not be ready for that kind of transition. So don't be in any rush. Just listen to your body and your spirit and your baby. Now, let's say you are ready. Navigating travel with children. This is my little guy here in Greece. I'm going to talk about air travel, the logistics here for a second, because it's quite an adventure. And if you've done it, you know what I mean. But I will tell you just basic tips that really, really helped me. First of all, it can be overwhelming to think about all the supplies and packing for a young child. I will tell you that this was actually less stressful than I thought it would be. And now, having traveled twice internationally with my son, once at 5 months, once at 9 months, I believe, you don't need as much as you think you do. Just like when we pack for ourselves and we overpack and we pack like 5 ball gowns and 3 ironing things, like you don't need all that stuff. And honestly, the same is true for children. You need the clothes, swimsuit, whatever, you know, diaper, swim diaper. Yes, there's a couple of extra things, sunscreen, whatever, but you don't actually need all these gadgets. What we did, which is usually facilitated by most airlines, is to bring a car seat and bring a stroller. Most of the airlines will let you do that for free. Some of them, you know, they're sticklers these days. Just check beforehand, what do they allow? A lot of them will let you bring an extra bag just for the baby for free, and that can have all the 5 ball gowns. I was just reading your comment, Yesha. A lot of the airlines will let you bring like a diaper bag for free that has, you know, formula or whatever. You can typically bring liquids if you have a baby, that they make an exception for that. I was lucky because I was exclusively breastfeeding, and I was also exclusively co-sleeping with my son at that point. So that means that he was eating regular people food or breast milk, and that's it. And then he was sleeping in bed with me. So it was very easy to actually just, you know, shift our routine into other countries, because he didn't need necessarily formula or a crib or bottles. that might not be true for everybody, right? You might need to bring a breast pump and all the things that entails. You might need to bring the formula and the bottles. So those are extra things, but really what you need at home is what you need when you're traveling. You might need to bring like a pack and play, of course, if you can't find a place with a crib and they're not sleeping with you. But those are just the basics. Stroller, I highly recommend, because I did have a baby carrier. I do bring the baby carrier, but you know, at a certain point, it might be hot and sweaty, and you don't always want to lug around a 20-pound baby. So it's good to have options, but don't go overboard with packing. Keep it simple, keep it simple, keep it simple. My advice too for traveling, for flying specifically, is to just talk to the airline before you go. You might even talk to them before you book that seat. If the baby's under 2, typically they can sit on your lap. You don't have to pay for an extra seat, but then they have to sit in your lap. And if you're on a 12-hour flight, you just have to think about these things. You can bring a car seat onto a plane and just book an extra seat and have them sleep in the car seat. Or you can do this nifty hack that I discovered, which is to book the baby bassinet on a long haul flight. So this is what we did. These are typically only available on the longer flights, like if you're flying overseas, but they have bassinets on a lot of these flights, and they are literally just baskets that hang on the side of the plane. Sometimes you have to book this front row seat, but it's nice. You have extra leg room. And you just put the baby in there and they sleep. And that's what my son did. He had a grand old time sleeping in that basket. The basket's free, and a lot of people don't know about that. So that's an option as well. Documents, of course, check with the airport, check with the airline, what sort of documents. Make sure you've got whatever the baby needs. They probably need a passport in this day and age. So just make sure you have all your ducks in a row before you do that. Balancing childcare, which is arguably the harder part than the logistics part. Prepare, prepare, prepare. And I have a quote at the very end about how I really do believe traveling with children is just like traveling by yourself. It really is, in my opinion. You should plan for the worst, expect the best, but plan for the worst and be over prepared. And this is not necessarily an attitude that I had when I was younger. I had a much more, carefree attitude traveling when I was younger. But these days, I don't know about you guys, but like airports have gotten so much more stressful over the past 20 years, and you just never know. So I'm at an age now where I'm much more interested in comfort and convenience. And if I can just prepare ahead for every possible scenario in my brain or on paper, then I feel so much better when I'm traveling. And that is infinitely more true with children. So when I'm traveling with my son, I will literally write out hour by hour what I'm expecting, at least for getting to our destination and coming back. I need to know, how are we getting to the airport? How are we getting to the gate from there, right? If the baby can't walk, how are we getting the baby to the gate? How are we getting the baby through security? Like, just to walk through step by step logistically, what do I need? Make a list. What could possibly come up? Even something as simple as, well, going through those security lines is stressful as it is. With a baby, I've done it with the stroller. It's stressful. So let me make sure I have someone there who can help me to fold up the stroller, or I can ask someone for help to get the stroller up on the thing and then put my baby on my chest or whatever, and walk through the metal detector, right? So even just thinking about little stuff like that, you feel so much more prepared and less stressed when it gets there. And of course, those little logistic things that sometimes fall through the crack. How am I going to get from the airport to my hotel or the retreat center? Is there transportation? Am I just assuming there's going to be an Uber there? Like, that's not always the case, right? So just making sure that you have a plan for every step. And then really, 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 when you have children, please add rest and recovery days. I do this now, even if I'm by myself. I know Yesha and I have talked about this, like just needing a certain level of breathing room on trips. Like, I think some of us, we just reach a point in our travels where we need that extra level of comfort and recovery. That's definitely true with children, because you don't know how you're going to be when you get to your destination. You might be exhausted, jet lagged, the baby might be exhausted, whatever. Just have an extra day where you don't necessarily have anything on your itinerary. Or if you're going through a retreat, nothing before the retreat starts. Just have a day to recover. I have begun to really prioritize comfort. And when I say comfort, I mean when I traveled to Greece with my son and my husband, I got there a day before I was facilitating the retreat, and I booked a really, really nice hotel in the city that we arrived. So we just had a really nice place to crash that I knew we could recover. A little extra money, but for me, it was worth budgeting for, because we got to recover and know we had all the amenities and we were not in some questionable place with a screaming infant. So that's something I personally budget for, just to make the journey a little smoother. If you have multiple kids and you're traveling with multiple kids, I can't speak to that because I'm not there yet, but just keep in mind that your considerations might multiply, right? Especially if they're at different stages. If you've got a toddler and an infant, that's going to be a very different journey than traveling with a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, right? So just think about those differences of where your children are at. And if it's just you traveling with them, what are you going to do? If you need help, one of the kids needs help with something and the other one needs help, you might need somebody there with you. You might need some help, or you might just need to bring one kid, or you might need to make it a mom-only trip. And same thing with older kids. If you have older kids, and by older, I mean, when I traveled internationally with my son, I'm admitting my limitations of experience here. He was an infant. Right now, he's 13 months old. He's very different now than he was when he was 9 months old. He's got a lot more attitude now. And I'm planning to return to Greece with him in April. And I'll tell you, I'm a little scared. Okay. So I'm just admitting here the limitations of my experience. So when I say older kids, I even mean like older than a tiny baby, right? Toddlers are a whole different experience. So there's going to be some unique moments there for your parenting, and that might be exacerbated, right, or intensified by traveling. So just keep that in mind, that these are all things that could come up where your child might feel overstimulated or overwhelmed, or they might feel scared of an airplane or whatever it is. And those might be things you have to anticipate. I'm reading Sylvia's comment. Infant easier than motor driven toddler pediatric OT speaking here. Yeah. Yes. As I clean up my toddlers, he deconstructs our bookshelf about 3 times a day. So very different experience, right? So do what's best for you. You know your child the best. Now, when it comes to uniquely spiritual journeys, because that's what this whole symposium is about. Traveling is its own thing. Traveling with children is its own thing. Traveling on a spiritual journey and trying to have a spiritual journey with children is a whole other thing, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about balancing spiritual journeys with childcare. And I even had I have an added layer of facilitating retreats and pilgrimages and spiritual journeys with children. Most of you probably don't necessarily have that situation, but I think some of these apply to both. Either way, you can absolutely have a powerful, transformative, beautiful spiritual journey with children there. Or you can go on your own as a mother and, set up childcare at home, whatever you need to do to have that experience. But I'm going to speak specifically about bringing children with. You can definitely include children when appropriate in spiritual experiences. And this simplifies so much. Now, again, they have to be a certain age. Will my toddler son necessarily be as quiet and non-disruptive as he was in, this experience here? I don't know, probably not. So think about those moments of what are experiences that would be appropriate to include the children in. There might be situations where you're in a group and you just don't know. You don't know what other people are necessarily comfortable with. So please communicate. If you're going to be in a group, especially, communication is key. Of course, make sure you can bring your kids if that's allowed. And if it is, then just make sure there are clear expectations and boundaries set all around. I always, when I'm facilitating an experience with my children along, with my child along, I always will put a disclaimer that, hey, if you sign up for this, if you come to be part of this thing, my son will probably be there and he will probably at times be nursing. Otherwise, I have things in place that make sure people can take care of him. He's not going to be there if we're having a really intense spiritual experience, right? He's not going to be disruptive. Those are things that I put in place to make sure, but he may be present at times for other things or at meals, he might be nursing, etc. So just make sure that you have clear expectations, that you've communicated, and be realistic as well about your limitations and the limitations of your child or your children, because if they get overtired and, you wanted to bring them on a hike, well, maybe you can't go on that hike, right? Or maybe you need to find someone to watch the baby so that you can go on that hike. And that is part of also making sure you have time for yourself as well. It's going to be really hard to have a meaningful spiritual journey if you're constantly having your mom hat on and doing childcare at the same time. So that means that you really do need a support system, or you need to find one at your destination. And that might mean hiring a babysitter, hiring a nanny, talking to, if you're going to a retreat center or you're part of a retreat experience, maybe they have recommendations for someone who would be willing to watch the child there. I've been very lucky that in both venues that I've facilitated retreats, there have just been people there as part of the staff there that love my child and just wanted to hold him and take him while I was eating meals and insisted that he come back. I think they like my son better than they like me, to be honest. So I've been very lucky, but it's been really beautiful and healing as well for me to realize that the village really does exist everywhere if we seek it. And so that means that we also need to ask for help. And I also had my husband along with me both of those times. So if you can have someone, a friend, come with you, or maybe it's, you and your mom, and you bring your baby along, and you have like a granddaughter, daughter, grandmother trip or something, where you can trade off and take turns doing childcare. That's going to be really, really key. And also along with that, don't be afraid to shift your plans, because the plans will need to be shifted at some point. There's going to be a day where things don't go according to plan. And we've all had those days as mothers where everything's just hitting the fan and the kids are screaming and we came down with a cold and the dishes are piling up, and whatever it is, that's going to happen when you're traveling too. Traveling is stressful sometimes. Traveling is not always smooth. So don't be afraid to set a really strong boundary and say, you know what, today is too much. I'm going to take a day off of this retreat. I'm going to take a day off of the itinerary. I'm going to shift this tour to that date. Or even to say, hey, we need to go home early. You know, somebody got sick or whatever it is. I got really sick when I went to Greece, actually. And thankfully, you know, I had like medication I could take. I was okay. I was not contagious. My son didn't get sick, but I'll tell you, if he had gotten really sick and it was all of us really sick, I don't know. I might have just been like, we need to change this to another time and we need to go home. So just be willing to shift. And that might also mean making sure you have flexible travel plans, flexible flights, right? Travel insurance, that sort of thing. Sylvia said, look for the grandmothers to help you. Yes, absolutely. And let me tell you, especially when you go to countries and cultures that are maybe a little more old world, like those grandmas will come out of the woodwork to hold your baby, and it can be a really beautiful experience. I think that, you know, for those of us in the United States, especially, we really lack that. And traveling in a way has really actually made me feel a lot less alone as a mother, a lot less isolated. And Sylvia also said this child will grow up to be a world citizen and have a backup facilitator. Yes, that's a great idea as well. And I really do think, like, have a buddy system if you're going to travel with kids. If you can't have, you know, a partner there, then bring a friend, bring your mom, bring your aunt, bring, you know, or even I tried to bribe my friend one time, hey, I'll pay for your trip if you come and promise to be like Alexios's babysitter if I need a babysitter. She's like, oh my gosh, I would love to, but I'm not available. So there's a lot of different ways to make it work, right? That can really give you the support that you need, but you do need some sort of support. So this is where I reiterate that I really do believe traveling with kids is not that much different from traveling by yourself. And again, I acknowledge that maybe this is my perspective because I am a pretty laid back traveler. It takes a lot to ruffle me. I think that having a child has just added like one little extra layer of consideration and preparation for me. So maybe if you don't feel quite as confident traveling or you're not quite as experienced, then you might just want to really take the time to prepare and read experiences from people who've traveled with kids, reach out to someone like me, right? Or someone who has older kids with more experience as well. Understand that anything can and will happen when you're traveling, kids or not. When we went to Greece, you know, I was on my way literally to facilitate this retreat, and as I'm driving to the airport, I had two participants text me. One of them said, I have COVID. The next one said, I am in London and I lost my passport and I don't know how to get out of this airport. And she was not from London, by the way. This was her connecting flight. So she was stranded in a foreign country and she couldn't get to Greece and she did not know where her passport had gone. So thankfully, you know, these things resolve, but all of this is to say, like, anything that can happen when you're traveling, it will happen at some point. And you roll with the punches and you learn to deal with it. And that will happen with kids, of course, as well. So just plan for the worst. And that way, when your flight does get delayed and you miss your connecting flight and you can't check into your hotel or whatever, you just know that you've thought about this in advance and maybe you have a backup plan, or at the very least, you have prepared yourself and your children for this. No matter what happens, though, what I can guarantee is that you will enjoy the journey together, and you will probably most significantly rediscover the world through the eyes of children. And this is what began my whole journey, right? Traveling as a child, that had just completely blown my world open and made it so much richer and made me curious and adventurous. And that's what I always lean into in the hardest moments of parenting, whether I'm traveling or not. Is just those little moments of delight where I get to experience the world and see the look of wonder on my child's eyes as he's discovering the world around him. That is infinitely more so when you're traveling. So no matter what happens, the bumps on the road, you shake it off and you have such a powerful journey together, and you make truly lasting memories. And I will tell you, I look back on these photos and it's just so fun because you see, where you've gone together, and it makes the journey unique. And I will say as well that one of the big fears that I always have as a mother is that I'm going to be inconveniencing to other people, right? Because I have kids, especially if I'm traveling in a group or I'm facilitating a retreat. It's a big concern of mine that, oh no, people are going to be annoyed if the baby starts crying, or what if he's crying incessantly and I need to step away or whatever. And that's happened, but I will tell you that as long as you've clearly communicated, to everybody what's happening, people are usually more than understanding and more than supportive. And I actually had somebody from my last retreat tell me, I had been feeling a little maybe I should not be bringing children to these experiences. Maybe it's too disruptive or whatever, even though I'm careful about making it not disruptive. I had been having some doubts, and I had a student actually tell me, no, Alexios was one of the highlights of that retreat for me. Not just because he was a baby and he's cute, but because I was surrounded by all these women in this beautiful experience. Don't get me wrong, but he actually brought a little balance to it with his little, rambunctious little boy energy. And I actually really liked just stepping away at times with him and holding him during meals and holding him during breaks and having that little release from the deep spiritual work, right? So you just never know. People are generally really supportive. And I think more and more, hopefully, we can start to shift this narrative of mothers need to just, stay at home and be good wives and be good mothers and never travel, never journey by themselves, never journey with their kids, whatever. I think that we can go out and slowly change that narrative by being world travelers with or without our kids. So that's what I have to share with you today. And thank you. I will open it up if there's any questions. Of course, some of you have more experience than me, so I would love to hear your questions. Otherwise, I'd love to just hear some of your reflections, maybe from your own experiences.
Thank you so much, Bri. And I'm going to stop the recording so that we can have just a space where everybody can talk freely. I wanted to just say, for those watching later, you can find Bri at Bri Nuccio on Instagram or at mountnysa.com online. And we have been so grateful for this sharing today. And I loved all the beautiful pictures of Alexios on his incredible goddess vacations in utero and beyond.